Hello and welcome to today's 18 Group webinar on how to get value from unstructured data using new approaches, tools and capabilities. My name's Sarah Underwood. I'm an editor here at 18 Group and I'll be moderating today's webinar. Our expert speakers today are Peter Jackson, Director at Carruthers and Jackson and co-author of Data-Driven Transformation, David Carr, Principal Solutions Engineer at MarkLogic, and Gaurav Bansal, founder of rCloud and a regulatory consultant to Tier 1 banks. I'll ask our speakers to introduce themselves in just a few minutes, but first just some info for you so that you can make the most of the webinar. To the right of the video screen, you'll see two panels. One is for Q&A and the other is for polls. We'll be running 4 polls throughout this webinar, so as a poll comes up, please do vote so that we can gauge the interest of our audience in some of the issues we'll be talking about. In the Q&A panel, please do put any questions you have from the speakers. We'll be answering questions as we go along, not waiting until the end. So as things come to mind, just put them there in the Q&A panel, and we'll answer as many as we can as we go along and during the webinar. So enough of me, and let's get over to our speakers. So Peter, please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your interest in unstructured data.
Good afternoon, Sarah. Nice to be with you. I'm Peter Jackson. I am a co-founder and director at Carruthers and Jackson. Until March last year, I was the group director of data science at Legal & General in the UK, responsible for leveraging and evangelizing data science across the very federated business of investment management, pensions, life insurance, insurance and capital markets across the global business. I was also had a secondary role there as the Chief Data Officer of Legal & General Investment Management, £1.4 trillion asset manager. So I had a huge interest in unstructured data, not only sort of the more traditional things we think about natural language processing, but also into some of the more unusual realms, which we will talk about later, I'm sure, in this. Prior to joining Legal & General, I'd been the Chief Data Officer at Southern Water, where we used a fair amount of unstructured data for monitoring and managing our infrastructure. Nice to be with you today.
Thank you, Peter. David, over to you.
Yeah, my name is David Carr. I work for MarkLogic, which is a company that's focused on helping firms solve problems with complex data and complex situations in general. And my personal focus is in financial services. I've been doing it over 20 years. Mostly working with the very largest banks and investment banks, and I'm very excited to be here. We're really focused on unstructured data because that's a really growing area that, because we're solving complex data, that's obviously where we're seeing most of our demand these days.
Thank you, David, and over to you, Gaurav.
Hi, I'm Gaurav Bansal. My background is I started my career in investment banking and worked for organizations like Goldman Sachs, Credit Suisse, UBS over the years, more in change management across different areas of the business, but more so in risk and regulatory areas. And a lot of the projects we worked on, included vast amounts of data, some structured, but there's a significant amount of unstructured data as well. And this was sort of my motivation to solve these data challenges, to start rCloud, which is something I started a few years ago, has been growing organically. And our position is now we are becoming more of a solution provider around the whole data automation journey. So right from sourcing data from different sources to organizing it, preparing it, and then finally reporting it. But more recently, we've also, so the way we do this is we actually partner with third-party products and vendors. So a lot of them have had their Series A funding, have a very good product. So we are like a shop which has different products on its shelves. And the one product which we brought in last year is an NLP engine. I think they're going to probably hit their unicorn status now this year. And they've been, we've had so much interest on that from asset managers and from insurance. So that's something which at the minute, unstructured data and how to, especially the NLP side, how to extract information is I'm kind of living and breathing at the minute. So sorry for that long-winded intro, but that's sort of about giving you a background.
Okay, that's all right. We'll bring you back in when we hit the NLP spot in the webinar. So with so much unstructured data out there, let's start with an audience poll. The question is, to what extent is your organization using unstructured data to deliver business value? And while you place your votes, let me come to Peter to set the scene and describe the universe of unstructured data and how it is evolving, because I think it is a universe.
I think that's a very good description. And I think taking that analogy further, it's like an ever expanding universe. I think that we started very much, as Gaurav was saying, with things like natural language processing. We're then going to voice to text and then into natural language processing. It's branched out into imagery and even pushing the boundaries of how you use that imagery and what you're looking for. I'll give one brief example to show how far those boundaries of the universe have pushed. At Elgin, we were looking at facial expressions. So, for example, when the governor of the Bank of England was delivering a presentation, it's not only important about what he's saying, it's the emotion behind what he is saying. And we were using some analysis on facial expression, obviously unstructured data, to try and get deep insight and intel into what the real message was behind the words. So it's expanding, it's ever expanding. I think one of the challenges in that expanding world is we're only limited by our own imaginations. What is the next piece of unstructured data? Where should we be looking next? And I think a lot of organizations see access or using unstructured data as a differentiator from their competitors. What is it we can offer in the market that makes us different from everybody else? What insight, what predictions, what analysis can we get that other people are not having access to because they're not thinking that way? But also the technology around it. If our imaginations are pushing the boundary of the universe of unstructured data, we need the technology to be able to get it, process it, store it, and then analyze it. So it's an interesting play at the moment. And I think that's one reason it's so exciting, is it is only bounded by imaginations, but we need the technology to go with it.
Okay, we'll come back to some of the practical aspects of that a bit later in the webinar. So David, what would you say, and how does Mark Logic view unstructured data, the big universe?
Yeah, so I think a key part of unstructured data is that data is a continuum. It's always been relational, and then there's XML and JSON, and then there's free text, and then you start getting transcriptions of phone messages and everything else. And what we're seeing is that you don't treat these by themselves, that you have to treat everything as a unified whole. And really what that means is taking the more unstructured data and processing it and bringing it into a format that it can be tightly integrated with the relational data and really made powerful. And a key part of that is it's not just the data, it's the tools. There's been a renaissance in data technology. So there's all these new things coming out like semantics and machine learning and everything else. And all of them provide different pieces to it. So if you're doing something on unstructured, in the old days, you just put search on it, run Elastic, and then you're up and running and you're done. And that's really not going to cut it today. And the world is so much bigger and so much more complicated. That's the hard part, that very few development teams have the expertise to understand all of the new technologies, and so they don't do anything like what they could do. And so understanding all of that and being able to handle it's the key to really getting what you can out of it.
Okay, excellent. So may we see those poll results? And Peter, perhaps you'd like to comment on the results. Well, we have quite different leaders there, with to a good extent and to a limited extent. What would you say?
I think it's interesting that the not at all is only 13%. I think that is encouraging. I think it's probably a very fair reflection of the market. I think, and I'm sure David will agree to me, there's a lot of unstructured data being used. Perhaps in that continuum you talked about, David, it might be at the more simple end. We all know that people are using, voice to text, NLP. They're stripping information out of company reports from PDF reports. And I'll be very surprised if a lot of the big asset managers, investment banks and banks or insurers aren't doing that already. So I am pretty unsurprised by these results, to be honest. I think if we were to do them in a year's time, I'd probably be expecting to shift more and more and more.
Okay, excellent. Perhaps we will be doing that. So thank you for that, Peter. And just to get a feel on how the audience is working with unstructured data, let's run a second poll. And this one asks, what are the use cases of unstructured data at your organization? And you can tick as many of the boxes as are appropriate. And while you do that, let me come back to David to talk about use cases and how they differ from those of structured data.
Yeah, so again, it's on a continuum. So we see very few applications that are pure unstructured. And what we're really seeing is people taking what they were trying to do before and then adding unstructured data to it to make it more powerful. And the kind of use cases that I personally am seeing a lot of are really, it comes down to three things: enhancing risk analysis, doing different kinds of 360 applications, or doing data discovery. And on data discovery, that's really becoming really critical because there's so much data that users can't find what they want. I mean, even if you've ever been to Google and typed things, there's going to be a lot of times when you're just frustrated because you're not seeing what you want, even though you know that somewhere somebody has done exactly what you need. And the reason why is because the tools available to you are just not what they should be. And so bringing in ontologies and actually assigning classifications to documents, doing all that kind of stuff really is important for making that kind of thing work. And on 360, it used to just be relational, but now you need to include surveys. Maybe if you're really advanced, you go to social media and can figure out which of your customers are talking about you, doing all that kind of stuff. Risk analysis has been around for a while, but like in criminal analysis, there's a lot of things where people are acting in concert to defraud a bank, for example. And then now that's really unstructured data. That's not something you're going to find in a relational database. It's going to be, analysis of what's going on with all these different people, figuring out how to link them together. And then the other use case, which is different than what's in your poll is really business cases. But a technical use case that I see a lot is, how do you process unstructured data to make it usable for machine learning and traditional BI? And the key thing there is traditional BI and machine learning need data in a grid. That's what they're designed for. And unstructured data is not in a grid. And so a lot of what people are doing today is processing that to turn your documents and your XML and your JSON into rectangles of data.
Okay, thank you very much indeed to our audience. I'm sorry that some of David's suggestions were not in our list, but let's have a look at the poll results and see what you thought. And David, would you like to comment on that? You did mention analytics and customers. So what do you think? Does that seem fair to you? That sort of dispersion?
Yeah, no, customer 360, employee 360, that is something every major firm is doing and had better be doing, or they're going to be out of business. And risk is, if you don't do proper risk mitigation, you're going out of business because the world is full of risk. So I absolutely agree with those top two. And the rest, yes, the rest are really broader versions of the top ones. And so I agree with this. It makes sense what people are doing.
Thank you very much indeed, David, and thank you to all of you who voted. And let me come back to Peter, if I may, to talk us through how business cases based on unstructured data can be built. Of course, for some senior managers, this is all new and it might be a bit difficult to ensure that you get the funding and the support you need. How do you go about it, Peter?
Well, I think, Sarah, you've nailed it there exactly by identifying the problem. It's, a lot of this is new. So I think that the starting point is like putting together any business case for any piece of data investigation or data analytics or technology investment. There has to be a business case, and that business case will be driven by value, and value could come in any types of increased revenue, reduced cost, increased customer retention, reduced churn, or whatever. And so it's interesting. I saw customer up there, David, in those charts. The second thing I would say, around a traditional business case is it a differentiator? Is it going to make us look different and behave differently in the market? That's market intelligence. And then third, often a business case is around risk and compliance, and that was the third one that was there. So the notes I was making beforehand are resonating nicely with those polls. So any business case, any lean business case is going to look at the value, the risk, or the differentiator it's going to build. The difference in this one, though, around unstructured data is the concept of data literacy. Are the senior execs that you're going to get the investment for what you're going to do they understand actually what you're talking about, what the limitations of it? It's not sort of like a Harry Potter magic wand. You're not going to turn the world around just by waving you on. It's going to be hard. There's going to be some failure involved, quite possibly, restarting, having another go. You might find out just how hard it is as you're going along. So that's test and learn. So it's a new approach for them to understand to a new topic. And I think that what is really important in these business cases is having them presented, right? Having them put together by somebody who can create the vision, who can create the story that the execs are going to understand. If we do X and Y, it will enable us to do A, B, and C. And making that into a compelling story, A, that they believe in, that they can trust, that they can understand what the outcomes might be. So I think that not only getting that story right, it's getting over the bit that there may be some failure. This is all new. Now, we've got to accept that there is some failure. And I remember Sir John Kingham at L&G, he loved it when I started to stop talking about let's fail fast, and I would talk about let's succeed quickly. And succeeding quickly is accepting some failure and learning and moving on. But they've got to be tight. They've got to be outcome driven in one way or another. You've got to identify the benefits.
Okay, thank you. David, what would you add there? How would you suggest building a business case?
Yeah, I agree with everything Peter just said. And I do think a key part of unstructured data is, as Peter said, there's really often no legacy solutions there except maybe for search. And so that makes it a lot easier because a lot of times you can't get projects funded because you're fighting with whoever owns the existing solution. And if all they're doing is running some stuff on Elastic, the battles are not there. And I personally have seen a lot of projects not get funded, and especially if they're either very expensive or disruptive to other groups, and lots of people have veto powers. And so the key thing is that, and I think internal IT organization at banks are not always good at this, is you have to offer something to both IT and end users. That in general, IT projects, IT groups are focused on adding new capabilities or making things easier for themselves. And adding new capabilities for IT and adding new capabilities for end users isn't always the same thing. End users are focused on what can I do today that I was never able to do before, or what can I do easier than I was ever able to do before. And so just because IT can do things with 20% less people, end users don't care. And if you're getting something done 20% easier, but you're making life a little harder on end users because they have to do things differently, then they're going to veto it. So make sure you go to everybody. Make sure you go to the end users. Make sure you're talking to IT, because if it's big and disruptive, everybody has a veto. So make sure you're hitting everybody. That's the thing that I've seen a million times why projects die. That there's so much, this is an area where there's so much untapped potential, you should be able to sell it. And when these things die, it's because you're not really selling it right.
If I may jump in, actually, a couple of real life examples come to mind. We had one sponsor who sort of went to their management board and said, there's this really interesting NLP tool, and we would like some money to implement it, to try it out. And they asked why, and they said, well, everybody else, our competitors are trying it out. And to spend a few £100,000 just on that everybody else is doing it, they got shut down. They didn't get the funding. Whereas the other guy in credit risk, he came with a compelling story. He said, we assess every day 34,000 counterparties who we have a net exposure to. Either we owe them money or they owe us money. And we do this, using traditional models of quantitative finance. We are actually, and we're missing out on opportunities where somebody's credit rating is not what it seems by the traditional models, based on their social media data, based on, maybe some of the other signals that they have not picked on from, news, etc. And he said, we could actually make more money, like, charge high interest to certain counterparties, and also, reduce risk with other counterparties who might be more likely to default. And the way he presented it, they got the funding, and we're doing that project. So that's I think that was the earlier point made, that always tied back to the business value. What is it for the business? How is it going to go forward?
Yep.
Yep.
And the use case you give is a very popular one, enhancing analysis.
Okay, great. Let's move on. So that's the business use case. I'm coming back to you, Peter. Please talk a little bit about what the initial actions are that data practitioners should be taking to start a project using unstructured data, and how, when they set out, and I know you said this isn't necessarily possible, can they ensure the project will deliver value?
I think once you've got your investment and you've convinced the powers that be that you're going to deliver value, this is the next thing. You've actually got to go and do it. And it's like any project. It's classic people, process, and technology. And so one of the starting points is make sure you've got the right people. Make sure you've got the right skills, you've got the right capacity, you've got the right people involved. And to David's point, you've got the hearts and mind one of people that this is actually going to be something they want to use and they're going to use. You're not going to be cut down in the fields because not everybody's bought into it. So people is really important. People, technology, and processes. You have to understand what processes you're going to change. What is the point of doing this? That kind of brings me on to the most important thing for getting value, is how you're going to operationalize this piece of mobilizing structured data. It's something new. It's going to be transformational. And if it doesn't transform a business process, just as Gaurav was saying, as how you're assessing credit or your relationship with counterparties, how is this new piece of intel that you're getting, market intelligence, how is it going to sit into the business process? Because those two things can become very separated. You can focus on the data science or the unstructured data over there, and it can be detached from the actual business process that it's going to change or impact. So it's like any really successful change project. You have to bring those two things together. And that means involving, from the earliest point, the business unit that's going to use it. They have to own what it is you're doing. And David, rather to your point earlier on, if it's seen as an IT or a data world thing that's nothing to do with the business, they probably won't adopt it. They'll carry on doing what they're doing. They have to be involved earlier on. That is the best way and the most certain way of getting business value. I have seen a number of data science projects that look fantastic, that look as if they're going to deliver cost savings or deliver new insights into the customer, but nobody's thought about how they're going to fit into the operational process. They've never been operationalized.
And no one wants their life inconvenienced because your life is better.
Yeah.
Okay, let's take a quick break here. I have a couple of audience questions that I think we can answer. One is very similar to something we've been talking about. I'm going to put it back to you, Peter. It's about we'd like to use unstructured data, but are finding it difficult to win management buy-in and budget. How best can we do this at a low cost? What's the sort of low cost beginning there?
I think if you want my personal experience, is probably go and find a stakeholder, a senior stakeholder who gets what you're doing. I have been fortunate enough in my career to find one or two of those at times. See if they've got some budget for a prototype or an alpha or a proof of concept. David, you're going to love this. Perhaps lean on suppliers as well to come in and help you with that proof of concept. Very often they'll be willing and up for that. So there are ways of actually demonstrating to the senior stakeholders what it is you're talking about. I sometimes describe this as what we're talking about here is almost like painting with a new color. And until you actually show them that color, they've got no concept of what it is you're talking about or how it can be used. So you've got to get over that initial line. So finding a minimum investment, perhaps from a stakeholder who's got a bit of spare cash around a project or is willing to stick his neck outside, his or her neck out, or finding suppliers to support you. I had some really good examples around ESG data 2 years ago, finding stakeholders who are wanting to get heavily inside ESG data. They had a budget for ESG innovation. That was a great place to go. If you can then demonstrate the techniques you're using in that one space for that one stakeholder, you might then be able to say, well, I've done that over there. It's exactly the same techniques I would use over here for this project.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed. And one for David, it sort of relates to our second poll on business use cases. And it asks, what does the panel perceive to be the biggest gain that can be made from unstructured data? You may be right and you may be wrong. I don't know.
The biggest gain from unstructured data is you make the better decisions and I mean, that's number one. And number two is you really can reduce your risk by validating all of your other data, having, there's a huge amount of information that's in there. So it's basically being able to do things you could never do before, making better decisions, getting better analysis. I mean, that's a kind of a vague answer, but unstructured data is a big subject. So.
Okay, Peter, Gaurav, would you like to comment on that? Where do you see
I think, it is it's quite an open-ended question, and I guess the answer is that it will highlight other ways of looking at things or provide additional information that you may not have thought of. Like some anecdotal. I was talking to some management teams who worked for 15, 20 years in that role, and they say, like, when we were discussing in management meetings 20 years ago, we used to talk about sales figures, cost figures, financials, the more kind of bare bones of a company. It's like nowadays the whole focus at that level is changing to, well, what is our customers thinking, what are the clients doing, and where are we going to get that information? The different avenues. What feedback are they leaving on our company chat or on social media? And actually, how can we translate all that information without employing thousands of people to read every tweet or read every sort of feedback, and get some sort of intel that where are they're having concerns or what more they would like to see from us. And I think that's a different way of now looking at some of those management meetings, which somebody gave an example. So for me, it's just opening up your mind really on what can do, as it was highlighted earlier in the session.
I kind of, Sarah, if I may jump in,
sure.
I think that there's, to build on both of those, I agree absolutely. I think that convincing people or getting senior execs to understand that we now have so much more data, and most of that data is unstructured data. And if you're going to limit yourself to only working with structured data, most of which you are producing, or you're getting people to produce in your digital environments, you are really limiting your business opportunities. There's huge amount of social media. Just think about the amount of data around customers on social media or products on social media. That's just one example. I think the other piece is that we are being faced with challenges that many businesses have never faced before, such as competition from suppliers or competitors in markets who were normally remote. But now in a digital world, you can be competing all over the world with people who you would never normally compete with, but also challenges like COVID. And when COVID started, we needed new data sets to try and answer the new questions that we'd never been asked before. And what was going to happen to supply chains by the disruption caused by COVID? And a really good example I wanted to talk about earlier on, and I said I'd come to, was using things like marine traffic. A simple web app that is available for anybody to use. I have it on my phone. Scraping the unstructured data from there gave us a view on what shipping was stuck outside Shanghai port, which would give us an insight and understanding into what was about to happen to supply chains.
Okay, thank you. As you always say, as big as you want it to be, really. So let's bring it back to the practical, if we can. And David, let me come to you to talk about some of the practical detail involved here. Perhaps, what approaches data management teams can take to capture and manage and analyze unstructured data, and how can they deal with the end-old problems of quality, accuracy, and timeliness?
Yeah, so the first thing is make sure you do handle data quality and accuracy issues. That when dealing with unstructured data, it's very common that you just get it, you dump it into SharePoint or something, and you start searching it, and your quality of your analysis is, at the very beginning it might be fine, and then once it's a couple of years old, who knows if it's any good or not. And so that's number one. Number two is, just because data is unstructured does not mean it will not benefit from some pre-processing. That data, how unstructured it is on a continuum. There's is JSON structured or unstructured? There's a lot of things you can do to JSON data, XML data, and totally unstructured data to pre-process it to make it more consistent and unified, which means it'll be easier to query and access. And to get back to something Peter was mentioning at the very beginning, agile is really, really important. Unstructured data is a huge area. There's lots of stuff. You can always make things better, but you need to have an approach where you can just start on your immediate goals, build them out, but then not have to start all over again for your second project. You need something where you define specs, you do your pre-processing, you do your analysis, and then when your second project starts, you're building on what's the first one. And then the other things are, you should add the specific kind of ways you should be analyzing your data is classifying it, pulling out metadata, finding links between the data, building semantic ontologies to describe the relationships between your different data. All these things will make it really much easier to use the data and to get accurate results. And if you build it in an agile way, you'll be able to get the data out as timely as possible, which is, of course, always really important.
Okay, and staying with you, David, another couple of issues that are very difficult, and it's the privacy issues that unstructured data presents. How can these be resolved?
Yeah, so the more unstructured the data it is, the harder the privacy issues are going to be to deal with, because somebody, like in a relational database, people put phone numbers into memo fields and they don't say that's what they're doing. And I've come across this kind of thing a lot. So it can be hard to protect it, and it can be hard to identify it. And it really is a hard problem. And so the first thing is there's automated tools out there. MarkLogic can actually help with this these days. We have a new acquisition for processing unstructured data. And so you need an automated tool that can be machine learning, something else that can understand what data that needs to be protected looks like what is the format of a phone number and things like that, and can go through all of your text and then field that so it's marked as needing to be protected. And then just because something is fielded doesn't mean it is protected. Then you need a data platform that, even if it's mostly just free flowing text, that if you've identified that this is a phone number or a birth date or something that needs to be protected, that it actually now is protected, that there's some, that you've encrypted it or done something to it so that if somebody's just scanning it, they can't see it. So there is no perfect solution for this kind of stuff, that somebody might write out a phone number in words and, instead of having numbers, and you'll just miss it. But those are the kind of things you need to do.
Okay, Peter, what would you add there? And often people talk about, if you've got lots of unstructured data, throw as much away as you can. Does that help with the privacy problems?
I totally agree with everything David says. I think it's an education process. People have to realize and go back to first principles of data privacy and the regulations of which they're working in. And I think, is in this data set that I'm bringing in, or this unstructured data set I'm bringing in, is there any personally identifiable information? Is there some sensitive information about a live individual that I am collecting here? And understand that an image is quite easy. What about voice? What about some of the data pieces in voice? But also, what about location? If you're taking location, and that can be hidden. It may be location because there's a landmark in the background of the person's image. So you know exactly where they were at what time when that picture was taken, because there's a well-known landmark. You have to almost think beyond the simple things. Is it a phone number? Is it a date of birth? Is it a postcode or a zip code? So it is a bit more complex, and that's why you need the right people involved in these projects. You will probably need somebody who understands data privacy, who's looking at the risk around the data privacy. Now, that's nothing new. You should have these people in your organization who are doing data privacy impact assessments under GDPR. And you should be doing that across any data set that is likely to involve PII data. So I think that it's a matter of making sure that your data governance program, your data privacy program, is beefed up enough and engaged with what it is you are doing.
Okay, thank you. Obviously, a lot of hurdles to jump here. And we've got a few more audience questions in I'd like to put to you. And I think, David, coming to you on what you're talking about, the practicalities. The question asks, searching for high quality data and indexing it is difficult. What tips would the panel provide for doing this? Searching for high quality data and indexing it is a problem.
Yes, so searching the high quality data, so data discovery is how I would characterize that. And yes, it is a big issue, and it's growing because of the amount of data is growing every day. And so you do need some tool to classify your information as it comes in, and that can be machine learning. And also there are other non-machine learning things that are not statistical as the data comes in. And so absolutely do that. And then semantic ontologies are really important for understanding how data is spread out. So the example I like to use is a high yield can also be called a high risk or a junk. And so when users are searching for things, they type one and then they don't find the others. And I've been told at major banks that when you go to a system and say, show me all the high yield bond information, they get 1/4 of what they need, because like a muni is a kind of a bond and things like that. So you need a data platform that doesn't require your users to have PhDs in the subject that they're doing the queries on. That's really where Google, for example, falls down, is that it's so broad that it can't help you, only to a limited extent, because it doesn't know where you're coming from. But when you're a bank or another organization, you understand your customers far better than Google will understand you. So you can actually make a data platform that's much, much smarter than just a generic search technology would be. So you can come in there and users type things the way they think about it, and your data platform understands how the data actually is interrelated and works together, and it can expand your searches and queries so that it works against the data, so the users can think about it the way they want. And then if you couple that with the classification, with the assigning of keywords as it comes in, then you can really help people find stuff pretty easily.
Okay. Another one for you, David, related to this question, and it says, what's the best way to store and access data unstructured data at a reasonable cost? So what are the storage elements here particularly?
Well, the physical storage, I don't have any comments on that. On a logical basis, the one recommendation I would make is when you get into subjects like metadata and lineage information and other things, you should keep all of that data together. And so this is like where relational systems fall apart, because everything has to be in a rectangle. So when you want to store all the information about the data, that gets stored someplace else. And then that becomes a disaster because it's not automatically there. And so it doesn't get updated. People don't always realize it's there and they don't find it. So my recommendation is everything about a piece of information should be stored in the same place as the information itself.
Okay, that's great. And Peter, coming to you as a practitioner, this question is something we haven't mentioned. I don't know if it's possible. The question asks, what are the panel's views on outsourcing unstructured data management?
I think it may often be a good idea, particularly in the early stages, before you have the skills or the technology to do it. It may be a way to accelerate into this what might be a new area for the organization. So I think there is a place for that. You want to get ownership of it fairly quickly, both the processes and the data. So it may be just a temporary solution you build, unless you have a great relationship you built by outsourcing. I think the one thing that would make me very cautious about it is the data privacy, data protection field. The outsourcer would be still your data processor. You may well be the data controller, so you're on the hook, whatever is being done with that data. So I'm not against it, but I think there are some things you need to think about.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. And the last one for now for you, Gaurav, and it asks, you're focusing on new business value and insights. What about the use of NLP into introducing efficiencies rather than incremental revenue promise? How do you sell this? So about NLP, I'm not sure how easy it is to sell NLP. What did you say? Can you sell efficiencies of NLP?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, some of the examples I'm going to give here. So we've had people like analyzing, public news blogs to get more up-to-date insight. I think I gave the example of the credit risk issue. I'm going to go completely in a different area, and politics. We've had live sort of blogs done and white papers done on how in the US election, even in the India election, which I know the Indians have prime minister, but they are more like presidential style election where one personality is the main. How they kind of assess the mood of the public, that are they for them, what policies, statements are they making, are they changing it? So it's not that immediately you can say that more votes are coming, but it's them getting more intel into what the public is thinking, what the mood is thinking. So just a completely different example. But you could apply this into organizations as well. So, we've had stories where organizations want to get a pulse on how the employees are feeling. Can they, scan the communicated chat, where, is the sentiment more negative? Are the employees upset about something? I mean, not one thing, but it could be multiple things. And I think there are different, I think to what Peter said, if you open just, we just need imagination here. There could be multiple areas where it could be applied, and you can, translate that back to your management to say, well, this is how it's going to, add more to what we need to do, and how it's going to, give us a sense of what's going on.
Okay, Peter, do you want to add anything there? You very much you talked about the business sell. Do you think NLP can be sold at this stage?
Yes.
The efficiencies of NPL, I should say, not purely NPL.
Yeah, absolutely. I think traditionally company reports were read and transcribed, and I think now there is a huge efficiency, and it's a very easy use case to say you can use NLP to do it. So I think that you think about some of the activities around LIBOR and IBOR, machine reading of documents was a hugely efficient way of doing a very onerous task, a monumental task. So I think it is easy to put an efficiency business case around it, just as people have with RPA. I'm not a great fan of RPA, but it is a very easy use case to put a business case around.
Okay, excellent. Thank you all. Thank you for your questions from our audience, and thank you to all of you for answering them. And let's come to our final poll for today, but we're actually going to run two. And the first poll asks you to what extent your organization is using artificial intelligence, machine learning, and natural language processing to extract value from unstructured data. So if you would like to place your votes on that one. And obviously, from I think my experience and A-Team's experience, there are some organizations with these technologies and these skills and the resources to use them fairly widely, and some which are far less advanced and are trying to do some catching up. Obviously, skills are often being a problem here. So once you've done that, could we see the second poll, which is related to this one? And it asks, which of these technologies are you focusing on at the moment to manage unstructured data? That one, you can tick as many of the boxes as you like. And while you do that, let me come back to Gaurav, who can talk to us a little bit more about the technologies, tools, and capabilities that are helpful to working with unstructured data, and what exactly the roles are of AI, ML, and MPL.
Yeah, so maybe let me start with the tools, and from an AI NLP use case, and I'll let Peter and David contribute as well. I think I tend to again break down from a business problem. So for me, the first step is sourcing of the data. So that's one, preparing it, then writing the NLP engine, and then finally also how are we going to visualize the results so that we can take some action. And for all these four problems, there are different set of tools. Now, a lot of people are using open source tools as well. You could build them in-house as well. But if I just say from a data sort of collation sourcing perspective, we are now getting a lot of these what we call the no-code. I think the traditional ELT is being now positioned as ETL, where the companies like Fivetran, without writing code, you could import multiple sources, put them onto Snowflake, then do the join, and then you can start consuming them. So I think I would, whilst yes, you could write these things yourself, but there are now lots of these companies products available, and quite neat products, which bring data from APIs quite quickly, that I would encourage people to look at. I think that the next bit then, in terms of once the data is prepared and ready, obviously the storage needs to be worked out, your data lakes, and what is the strategy for that. But then in terms of actually the NLP or predictive forecasting that you want to run on it, whilst at the minute I think that the market is exploding in terms of the number of NLP providers, like ready-made NLP providers. A lot of them sort of take the Google BERT and and then build on top of that. And but what I'm seeing is that the machine learning data scientists in these large organizations, are sort of more proud to sort of say, this is something we will learn. We want to have our own models, and we will use our own sort of, using Python, Jupyter notebooks, tools like that to write our own algorithms and do that. But yet we are, also seeing a success for ready-made NLP platforms like Axon, for example, which is doing really well. And then finally, once you've produce those results, how do you visualize it? In just dashboards, but Tableau, Power BI. There are, again, a number of products, but those are probably I would say the leaders who would then allow you to visualize and make sense of the results that you achieved. But I think that's probably, I will probably take a pause there. But that's my kind of how I break down the problem and how I would use different tools and sets to kind of bring it all together.
Okay, thank you. David, what would you say about tools and techs that people can use for this?
Yeah, so there's lots of tools. I do think, like, when you get into AI, I do think semantic ontologies, I've spoken about it a few times already, are really important because it turns your data platform into a smart data platform so your users don't need to be. And then at the other side, I completely agree with Gaurav on bringing it in is really important, pre-processing the data to make it as usable. So the problem with unstructured data is users can't find what they want. It's all just a mess. So anything you can do to help them categorize it, pre-process it, make it into a unified whole is just going to make your project successful. And then you need that. So you need something that's agile, that has all of the different tools are there. And the biggest problem is the data world has become so complex that there's very few development teams that have the skills. So you really do need to move towards the no code kind of solution Gaurav was talking about, where you're just telling the system what you want and someone else has put a wrapper around the complexity of handling all of the new kind of technologies in the data world today. So that's where I think you really want to come in is the industry's been led by the early adopters and the people who really delve in and know how to make it work. But to become a true mass market, it's got to be made easy enough for the average development team to do. And I don't really see that happening so much. What I see is people's solutions are suboptimal because they do what they have the skills to do, not that they are taking advantage of everything there. So that's the one focus is find somebody who's putting a wrapper around it, making it easy for you to really get all of the benefits out of everything that's there. And that goes from machine learning, semantics, other kinds of AI, classification engines, and tools for integrating diverse data sets, to all the different ways to query the data.
Actually, what's more important than the tools, and to your point, it's actually a human element here, the architect. Who's the architect designing and owning the whole problem end to end, and then they will advise which bits are they going to build themselves, what tool technologies are going to use to do that, where they should use a third-party tool to solve a particular problem. But yeah, so I think it's we have lots of toys there, but we need somebody to sort of come and say, how do we put it all together?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, let's see those poll results and see if we're talking about the same thing as our audience. So this is the first one, David. What would you say to that one? To what extent your organization is using these types of tools? What would you think to that?
Yeah, that's a little surprising. I mean,
it's very positive. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so that's good that people are using it to a good extent. The one comment I would have is, I think a risk of machine learning is that if you're using machine learning to make important decisions involving people, you are opening yourself up to lawsuits, because if somebody comes along and shows that your decisions are discriminating against people and your defense is, well, the computer told me to do it, then that doesn't really cut it. So I do think that keeping in mind that some things it doesn't matter, but if you're making hiring decisions or loan decisions or something based on your system, make sure you understand what it's doing. So that's the one thing, that the one caveat I would put on machine learning specifically. Don't go overboard. It's really powerful and it can be very valuable. Sometimes it just reflects what's out there and not what's, the underlying truth is. So keep that in mind, but it's good that they're using it. And these things are much less expensive and really can add a lot of value.
Okay, let's look at the second poll result, if we may, please. Ah, well, you have been warned. David, I absolutely understand your moments. We have the bias problem and all those sorts of things in machine learning, which obviously does creep into other AIs and so on. So the rest seems fairly even. So let's leave it there. And the positive thing that people are using these tools to a fairly great extent. That's excellent. Thank you very much indeed. And let's move on. And let me come back to Peter, please, if I may, and talk about the business and operational benefits of getting unstructured data right, but also the penalties of getting it wrong. We've talked about some of these along the way, but how would you sum that up?
If you're asking me to sum it up, Sarah, I think the word I've used is transformational. I think that by using unstructured data and operationalizing those processes and the insights properly, it can be transformational for an organization. I think that's what a lot of people are after. I think that getting it wrong or not going on that journey is almost an existential threat. You know, if you don't do this, what are your competitors going to be doing? How are you going to maintain your place in the marketplace? And I think that if you do get it wrong, it can be catastrophic for you. I mean, not only from that existential point of view, but from the point of view of if you get the data privacy wrong, if you get that sort of thing wrong, or you're making, to David's point, if your data quality isn't good enough and you're putting poor quality data into these machine learning or artificial intelligence processes, you're going to get poor decisions being made. I heard Scott Taylor say the other day that AI can actually stand for artificial insanity. So, you've got to put controls around these processes, as you would with anything else in financial services. You have to put controls around the data sets that have been used for training in machine learning, perhaps, or how they're being applied, the feedback loops to make sure that the outcomes are what you expected. You need the subject matter experts involved to say, you know what, you might be clever, but that just doesn't look right. And you need compliance and control involved and educated in what it is you're trying to do. So, I think it's transformational, existential, and there's some big risks.
Okay, Gaurav, what would you say there in terms of the benefits and the risks?
Yeah, completely agree with Peter there. I think I'll keep it short, but from getting it right is I think it's competitive advantage, increasing in efficiency, opening up new business opportunities. So those for me are the main themes around getting it right. And again, as Peter said, it's not sort of an option anymore. It's something that everybody needs to do. Getting it wrong, I think, in addition to the points that Peter mentioned, I sometimes also feel that people, if they get it wrong, they end up with expensive projects that have delivered no value, and they've almost made the management less motivated or disinterested for funding future projects, and almost sort of spoil the show for any other guys who wanted to come in and solve this. So I think getting it wrong it could be quite catastrophic. The only thing I would say to that is start small. Take small steps, show value, build on that, rather than taking on something quite open-ended that usually leads to issues.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you. Okay, we haven't got a lot of time left, so from each one of you, please starting with you, David, if you would, could you provide an example of a business solution based on unstructured data that has yielded value?
Yeah, I'll just very quickly list. So the 3 projects that I've really seen provide value that have a lot of unstructured data are talent acquisition, research portals, and detection of criminal activity. And so talent acquisition is really important today. Everyone's quitting. And by using all of the information, both internally and for keeping your employees or helping them find promotions or bringing new ones, most of the interesting data is actually unstructured. So you have to be able to do it. Research portals, by definition, there's just more and more data. It's all kind of unstructured, kind of, JSON files at most, nothing that's, and so as there's more and more information, just being able to help users find this stuff. Detection of criminal activity is really about, in the unstructured realm, is really about that people work in groups when they're engaging in criminal activity, and a lot of that is hard to find in a relational database. So we're low on time, so I'll leave it at that.
Okay, Gaurav, a successful solution?
Yes, so some practical applications I've seen is in credit risk, which I sort of hinted upon earlier. And the other one is hugely in insurance, claims management. We've had a few car insurers, I think, are now doing this, looking at, images and coming up with a view of what the damage would be and trying to automatically process claims as much as they can. Legal firms, analyzing contracts using machine learning and NLP. And also in asset management, for using public news, blogs, social media to get a sense on ESG data or ESG signals, investment signals. So those are some of the practical applications we've seen.
Okay, it's a long list. Peter, what are you going to add?
Well, great examples there from the other guys. Three I would add. One is what I was talking about earlier was the supply chain prediction. And we actually did that using that kind of data and analysis. And that's joining multiple unstructured data sets together, which is quite challenging in itself. The second, very much what Gaurav was saying, is around insurance, particularly around business insurance. I've seen a particularly good example in New York around business fire insurance, using a lot of unstructured data, gathering data to actually assess risk beyond what is normally the parameters that are used, particularly in the high risk markets, fast food outlets, things like that, where they might struggle to get fire insurance. It's an interesting market. And then finally, employee churn. Using things like scraping data from social media, from Glassdoor, from things like that, to look at employee churn, get an indication as to which parts of your organization where employees might be unsatisfied or satisfied, and what they're saying about the organization. So almost, as I said, right at the top, limited by our imagination.
Okay, so with so many opportunities, my last question to our speakers is, what guidance would they give to people who are beginning to practice or are practicing with working on unstructured data? And Gaurav, please, would you kick us off on this one?
I think probably a lot of the points we resonated earlier in the call. So start with the business value. What are you trying to achieve? I think make sure that's ironed out. Make sure it's understood by the sponsors, and make them own this piece. The second is, even though it's unstructured data, it's huge, it's vast. Try to take small steps, narrow down. Which bits are you going to look at first? What data exactly are you going to analyze, scan, and really build in that fashion. I think, and it would be my advice or 2 cents on it.
Thank you, Peter. A few words from you.
Absolutely perfect what Gaurav said. I will add to that with, don't forget it's people, processes, and technology. It's the three that have to operate together, and don't overlook the privacy.
Okay, some final words from you, David.
Yeah, I agree with both of the previous two. And at a technical level, be agile. And even though it's unstructured, pre-process it and consider all the new technologies out there, because we really are in a whole new world and can do things we couldn't do before.
Excellent. Thank you all very, very much indeed for sharing your expertise and experience with us. Thank you too to MarkLogic for sponsoring today's webinar. It's been a very good conversation. Before we close up, just a few A-Team Group items that may be of interest to you. If you scroll down your screen to additional options, you can register for our March webinars on how to optimize the business value of your data using agile data governance. And the age-old problem of FRTB, what still needs to be done before the global deadline of January 2023. You can also find out more about A-Team Connect, a powerful and professional platform that you can use yourselves to deliver highly effective and interactive events and webinars. That said, that's it for today. So thank you again to David, Peter, and Gaurav, and thank you to all of you who've taken part in the webinar. Please complete our feedback form, as we're always keen to hear your views and improve our products. Meantime, thanks again to all of you and to our speakers, and goodbye.